Hello and welcome again to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. Once again, I am, as I often do, going to read some research, or at least the abstract of the research, and make commentary. So the thing that I'm going to read today, or read the abstract of, is an article titled European Research Priorities for Osteopathic Care, ProCare, a sequential exploratory investigation and survey. Okay, so that's the title. If you want to go look it up, please feel free to do so. Unless you have institutional access, you're more likely than not only going to run into the abstract. Now, abstracts are not a full paper. There is definitely stuff missing, but the point of the abstract is to give the general picture explicitly enough that you get the point. Okay, so to read from the abstract, the objectives. The aim of this study is to identify and analyze research priorities across the osteopathic profession internationally, to determine how different interested parties conceptualize research importance, and to examine how contextual factors influence research prioritization. Okay, so did they say it there? No, it's not there. They do a decent job being explicit about what they want to do with the things that they're about to tell you and how they're trying to find out about priorities of research priorities within the osteopathic profession. Okay, so to read the design. A mixed method sequential exploratory design combining an umbrella review, a thematic analysis, an expert consensus agreement, and an international cross-sectional survey was used to define, validate, and evaluate research priorities. Okay, so there's multiple terms there that you would have to look up to better understand the elements of each of these things. Okay, so mixed methods means generally you're going to mix a quantitative approach and a qualitative approach. Something I want to be exceptionally clear on, because I believe I am encountering consistent misunderstandings about quantitative approaches. I've talked about this before, and I don't know, because I haven't looked, if this is well described in any form of literature, whether it be philosophy of science or underpinning papers about quantitative research. Quantitative research seems to be flippantly referred to as numbers-based or numerical or maybe arithmetic. Say addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. It's kind of math. That is part of it, but it is not properly representing what the point is. The point of quantitative research is to take something and translate it into a language in the form of math that allows it to be communicated in an agreed upon way. It attempts to make things more clear, despite the fact that if you feel uncomfortable with numbers or you lack skill with numbers, it can seem too abstract. The point is to create some translational mechanism to go from things that could superficially look different, but on a deeper level are the same. So the example that I often use is a shoelace can be described with respect to a standard unit of measure in an inch. A hair can be described with the standard unit of measure of an inch or inches. The length of the sleeve of a shirt could be described in the agreed upon measurement of inches, right? You can also translate the exact same things, which are notably different. So a shoelace, a hair, the length of a sleeve, they are different things, okay? But the thing that we can agree upon so that we can have some understanding between those things, so we can describe them in their own right in a specific category, but it allows translation. We can take it from inches to centimeters. We can take it from centimeters to millimeters. We can take it from centimeters to feet. We can take it from centimeters to cubits if we had to. Agreed upon units of measure allow for translation of a physical quality or an observable quality. Maybe observable quality is better, because you can take say, the frequency of a given word. Now, that word may not necessarily be a physical quality, but it could be how many times it occurs within a given text. So that would be a translation from the reading of it and its maybe non-physical representation, or possibly physical representation, to something where you could compare it to other words. So you can go between numbers-based systems that have agreed upon standards, inches to centimeters to millimeters to feet to meters, whatever it happens to be. You can move between these things. Because what you're trying to do is translate a characteristic, a quality, into an agreed upon system so you can compare things, okay? Qualitative research doesn't necessarily aim to do that. However, it can. You can use translational systems from frequency to number representations in qualitative research. You can talk about how often a particular theme occurs. So in qualitative research, you go from free text response in the form of written response, in the form of verbal response that is recorded and can later be reobserved, and you create what are called codes, and you can often do this iteratively, or you find what you think is a theme and then you continue to go through the material and you can see if that reoccurs or if it falls into another theme that is more concrete or more consistent. And then you can report the frequency at which that theme occurs between individuals who respond. So qualitative research does not necessarily mean no numbers. It means that you're attempting to, say, play in the rough. Now that may sound dismissive, and it's not intended to be. It's intended to suggest, maybe stated a better way, that you're attempting to do a better job or be more attentive to nuance and not necessarily try to standardize. There's still going to be some way in which, for rigor, you're trying to use a qualitative approach to get to some form of consistency, because otherwise you kind of have nothing to report other than just let everybody read free text. So there's still some translational element. The translational element of qualitative is often codes and themes, whereas the translational element of quantitative is from characteristic, observable characteristic, to numerical agreed upon system. They're both translational. They're both trying to do something similar, but they use different tools. So to simply say that quantitative is numbers misses the point. The point is translate for communication with agreed upon standard. Qualitative may take an approach where the coding, the iterative coding, attempts to generate a new communication method or a new set of themes, right? So neither one is broadly superior. They will have their usefulness, okay? So after all of that, thank you for listening to that. Hopefully that, with a bunch of words, helps better explain what I'm trying to say. As simply as possible, quantitative measurements or quantitative approaches attempt to move from observable characteristic to agreed upon standard that can be communicated with a number. Whereas qualitative may attempt to build a new standard through coding approaches iteratively, so start from a new point of learning, whereby you could generate a new communication standard to translate from free text or maybe variable observation to some form of normalized representation or normalized theme, right? So lots of words, thank you. Anyways, to go back to the design portion here, umbrella review, that would be a very specific term regarding a review. Now, I am very used to scoping review, systematic review. They have very clear steps, very clear agreed upon standards to try to generate an inclusion-exclusion criteria, generate a question that you are querying existing research with, and then your reporting standards, what you are trying to do to normalize the variance between the included papers so that you can then report and judge. Then you have a narrative review, which is essentially you're relying on the expert opinion of the writer or writing group. They know enough about a particular field that you sort of trust that they're not going to leave stuff out. With a narrative review, you have to check. An umbrella review is a new term to me, so to be more accurate, I would have to look it up. I don't need to do that right now for the process that I'm undertaking. Needless to say, if I wanted to be exceptionally critical, I would have to look up exactly what umbrella review means. So I'm not going to take any guesses. I'm just going to take the word at face value and say that it exists. That would be some form of review process. There may or may not be standards for how that functions from start to finish. I don't know. Okay? A thematic analysis. So thematic analysis would be that qualitative approach that I was talking about prior. You are trying to identify consistent things, consistent categories, ontological categories, categories that describe reality, that are different from one another. So a theme would be a way to describe something that consistently occurs that is similar to other things, but different than other things you find within the research. So there is a similarity requirement. This is similar to what other people have reported, and there's a difference requirement. This is different than all other things reported. So it becomes a standalone box. So you're trying to put it in a box. So like I said, with qualitative research, you're attempting to create themes or categories. You can do that without translating to number, or you can do it with translating to number. You can do it with translating to word, and that word becomes the uniting thing that all other portions dropped into that box or that category attached to. And then there's another word that becomes another box that all reports that you place in there attached to. You can then translate that to numbers, or you can just leave it as the heading or the categorical word. Then you get into expert consensus agreement. So that would be an iterative process. You could have quantitative elements, you could have qualitative elements, but what they're saying is that there is an appointed group that is considered experts, whether or not you have a standardized set of criteria to qualify them as experts, or it was just the opinion of other experts. I think this person's an expert. I think this person's an expert. That is not necessarily described here. It may be more appropriately described within the full text, which I don't have access to as it stands. And then the final one, an international cross-sectional survey. So they don't say what kind of survey, but they do say the job that the survey was intended to do, to define, validate, and evaluate research priorities. Now, when you are doing a survey, there are automatic problems, okay? Reporting within survey, first of all, those people who will answer a survey tend to be similar to one another and different from people who will not answer the survey. Therefore, the people who answer the survey are not necessarily representative of the people that you're trying to get information from. So let's just say you have a group of, you're looking to understand what people who like chocolate chip cookies think about something else. There will be those who eat chocolate chip cookies and are willing to respond, and those who eat chocolate chip cookies and are unwilling to respond. It is more likely that those who are unwilling to respond are a larger group than those who are willing to respond in many cases. It is also likely that, or it is definite that their opinion will not be counted in the outcome of the survey. Then you move on to how people tend to answer surveys. Those people who are similar to one another and are willing to answer surveys tend to answer with respect to group norms or perceived group norms. Now, those perceived group norms often function as, I'm going to respond in the way that I think will not get me kicked out of the group based on how I perceive their preferences. That is not always the case, but it is a common enough thing that it essentially, for lack of a better term, taints survey outcomes, okay? You can have a very rigorous process to then define, validate, and evaluate research priorities. It may be that those who are willing to respond to something about research priorities are that subset of people who are interested in research and research priorities within osteopathy. then further subdivided to those who are more willing to answer the survey. So you've got a sampling problem the moment you use a survey. You have a sampling problem the moment you're trying to look for opinions, whether it's a survey or not. Your collection methods also generate the challenge of reporting preferences or reporting consistencies, in that people will report in a particular way more often than they will report in a varied way, right? Now, these are consistencies or statistical normalities or statistical consistencies, but they are strong enough that they seem to happen in varying circumstances. So it's not a definite knock, but it is a consideration, okay? Now, to move on, or to maybe reiterate that, there are multiple methods here that have well-defined approaches that may or may not play well together. This could be an exceptionally well-designed mixed methods, or this could just be a pastiche or a collage of what these particular researchers had comfort with. What ends up happening with mixed methods sometimes is that you will have a group. They will say, hey, you're quantitative, hey, you're qualitative. Why don't you do your strong thing and I'll do my strong thing, right? So the skill of the researcher or the research group may live in very particular domains, such that other domains which may be more appropriate for the research question are not used because the research group does not hold those skills. That's possible. It is not definite. So that is not a critique here. It is a comment on what could happen with mixed methods. So it's hard to say from what I have available to me if this is a fantastic methodology with respect to mixed methods, or if this is just kind of a smattering of what these people happen to be decent at. The setting, okay, to read again, an international online survey available in 9 languages was distributed through professional osteopathic organizations and networks worldwide, a patient representative organization, and social media. Okay, there may have been a single patient representative organization in one of the areas, or there may have been multiple, I can't tell. Social media doesn't specifically say, could be multiple platforms. One of the things about social media is that you definitely have demographic stratification, such that some professions may exist more in their professional sense within particular social media platforms. Some individuals, based on their age and country and culture, may use some social media platforms over others. And then you'll get differences between the generations, such that, say for myself, as a middle-aged North American, I am much more likely to enjoy Instagram as opposed to TikTok. Even though, say, TikTok has exceptionally similar user features, I just am more in tune with Instagram. Whereas when it first came out, Facebook was the deal, and now I feel unrepresented within Facebook because it seems to skew to a demographic that is older than me, right? So just as a simple overview there. To read the participants, 2,229 respondents, including patients, which was 7.4%, practitioners, which was 42.1%, students, 17.4%, educators, 13.5%, researchers, 5%, and policymakers, 4.3% from across 42 countries. Okay, so it is at least possible that the practitioners, people who identify as practitioners, are those who are not also educators and also researchers and also policymakers, whereas the policymaker could also be a practitioner, but they identify as policymaker. The researcher could also be practitioner, but identifies as researcher. The educator could also be researcher and policymaker. Like you have some crosstalk, but I think it's just the self-identification here. So the people would more likely have self-identified, and there may be some blurring. For the purposes of what they're going to try to say, I don't think it's a gigantic problem. Students were included, right? So the students may be less likely to have a fully formed opinion and more an opinion that relates to their preferred educator. It's worth considering, right? To read again, primary and secondary outcome measures. Primary outcomes were interested parties' conceptualization and research importance and validations of the priorities in research for osteopathic care framework. Secondary outcomes included current research priorities across interested party groups and influence of contextual factors on prioritization. So this is sort of like, it already says it, but it's an attempt at normalization to drive organizational push for where research is headed within osteopathy. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, to be fair. Consensus is good for some things and horrible for others. So for creativity, consensus is not ideal for creativity in certain ways. If it is to set the agenda of what is allowed. Whereas if you have a consistent approach to activity or more boundaries, you can be more creative within those boundaries, but not outside of those boundaries. So maybe the better way to say it is the boundaries that may be set by consensus means that if the creativity required to solve a new problem exists within those boundaries, it can be found. And it may be found with less effort by those playing within those boundaries. However, if the solution to the new problem lies outside of the boundaries already set by consensus, it's not going to be found. Okay, so depending on what the goal is, it can increase the ease of creativity within the boundaries, but it can also make it so that a possible solution to a new problem will never be found. Okay, so that may be the better way to say it. So it's not so much about creativity as it is about the possible location of the solution to a new problem with respect to the abstract concept of a boundary. Maybe there's already research priorities within the Procreate framework, which I am not aware of, which is fine, but they are probably already there. Anyways, to look at the results, as reported in the abstract, 3 distinct approaches to priority setting emerged. A conservative approach, 42.9%, a skeptic approach, 20.2%, and an enthusiast approach, 36.9%. So something that I talk about from time to time on any topic is uneven thirds. So you tend to have uneven thirds. You have a third that has their mind made up on one side, a third that has their mind made up on another side, and a group that can be swayed. So the conservative could probably be swayed towards the skeptic or towards the enthusiast, and the conservative is the largest group. Now, they don't define what that necessarily means here, which is fine, but the definition could be found in the full text if you have institutional access or you subscribe to the British Medical Journal. Organizing research priorities as a construct built from domains and subdomains was shown to be internally valid. Cronbach's alpha 0.911. So they're just showing that if they wanted to build with the data that they had, sure, it would hit validity in a particular way or a particular domain of validity. There are multiple forms of validity, so you have to make the axiological or value-based choice of which type of validity you're trying to support, or which one you are okay with supporting, or ones you're okay with supporting. Reading again, patient safety, nominated by 82% of relevant countries. That's a weird reporting because it's not necessarily respondents, it's the countries. So maybe what they did was they took they subdivided this by country and then said, within this country, does it go beyond a certain threshold to say this? I don't know. That's a little funny. It doesn't seem to match. It's not that it has no value. It seems out of place of relevant countries. And physical activities and mobility by 51% of countries, apparently, were the most prioritized subdomains. That sticks out. Seems funny when you're previously reporting the general bulk or the general percentage of all responses versus the countries, the percentage of countries. That's weird. Anyways, to read again, digital health ranked lowest, 28th of 28 subdomains. No definition of what digital health is, but for osteopathy, it's a little funny because osteopathy happens to be a hands-on physical modality. Significant geographic variations were observed mainly for the overall importance of research domains. Strong consensus emerged around core priorities, including patient safety, physical activity promotion, and understanding treatment mechanisms. Okay, The patient safety technically should be 100%. That should almost be a non-category. It should be a given. The fact that it's 82% of countries is interesting to me. That may mean something about culture, where the culture may prioritize the practitioner more than the patient. That's possible. But it should always be 100%, no matter how you measure it. You'd kind of be a goof if you didn't say that patient safety was exceptionally important. The physical activity promotion, that sounds like people who, as a theme or as a domain, that sounds like something that is policy-based in my experience, that people are trying to push the idea of promoting physical activity. What I will say is this: as somebody who has been purposely physically active for a very long time, being physically active, that term is very loaded. Exercise is healthy is a very loaded term. So, well, what do you define as exercise? The approach that I tend to take, due to personal experience with a wide variety of people, is that physical activity or exercise, the best one is the one you are willing to do again, because it is the one that will have benefit because you will do it. Trying to find a physical activity or a normalized promotional approach to physical activity is fairly disrespectful to normal variance between people and their preferences for what they were willing to do physically and consistently that could then benefit them. If this category, as reported, is including how somebody could help somebody else problem solve their way into being consistently physically active, I'm down. I don't know that that's what they're reporting, but I also have no way to know because I can't see the full definition of the subdomain. So then the understanding treatment mechanisms, the fact that that's lower is interesting. I find a fetish around that in my experience of the profession of osteopathy. Osteopathy works just fine whether you understand the mechanism of the treatment or not, because the mechanism of figuring out what is going to work is responding to how the patient responds to what you do with them. And I say with on purpose, not to. I say with. You don't have to understand the mechanism to observe whether they responded in the direction that would be ideal or not. You don't need to understand the mechanism of the technique you're using to notice if they jump, if they contract fast, if they pull away, if they make a face or a noise in response to what you do. You do not need to know the mechanism. So maybe people are recognizing that more, or they just don't know that they were supposed to report that it mattered. Anyways, to read the conclusions. The ProCare framework provides a validated structure for evaluating osteopathic research priorities across diverse interested parties, while geographic variations exist in priority emphasis. Fundamental agreement on key research domains suggests potential for internationally coordinated research strategies. Being, trying to set the boundaries where things will be okay. So trying to set, for lack of a better term, an Overton window. Overton window is a description of the socially acceptable topics for discussion and reporting in, I guess you'd call it media, maybe news, whatever term you prefer. But they're trying to set a window within which people will play, which then also determines funding avenues. It's a bit of a policing mechanism, and I don't agree with it, although I completely understand the drive and preference for it, right? Because then you feel like you can properly judge whether or not something is being done in a way that you will axiologically or with an axiological decision or a values-based decision, what you will support and agree with, okay? Just because you don't agree with something doesn't mean it's not valuable. And just because something else exists doesn't mean it is valuable, right? There are a lot of things that are not useful, but do exist, depending on how you slice and frame that. But there's also a lot of things that a lot of people don't like that are very useful, right? The To read again, future work should focus on developing mechanisms to ensure balanced representation of conservative, skeptic, and enthusiast perspectives in research planning. So that's essentially attempting to include stakeholders identified by the process that they believe is valuable. It's setting a research agenda. This is setting an arc for multiple authors. It's trying to maintain their trajectory within current academic frameworks, which do have issues. One of those issues is peer review. Peer review could be called peer preview. If you really get nitty-gritty on peer review, it may almost be a control mechanism, and also a reporting network to interested individuals, or individuals who are interested in not only knowing what developments are happening, but knowing what developments they should stamp out. Worth considering if you care to run down that track and understand that better. The first place to begin would be Robert Maxwell and Pergamon Press, and how that was the major point of explosion of peer review in non-medical professions. Within the methodologies presented here, these authors did a fine job. I can't tell you that I agree with all of the approaches, nor does it necessarily matter if I agree. Their conclusions fit a normal academic trajectory, normal academic preferences, rather. I think the thing that I'd like to take from this goes back to a point I already made about setting research priorities. You're setting research priorities, especially with predefined, even if it's from the ground up, because you say that it's thematic analysis from qualitative methodologies, such that it's more of a quote-unquote bottom-up approach. Well, they're trying to take it and turn it into a top-down approach. They're trying to say they work bottom-up, they included interested stakeholders, therefore their opinions are there. They're not acknowledging that because they use specific methodologies, it excludes large amounts of people within a profession who may have valuable opinions that are just turned away by the methodology. The method of collection is the best way to put it. It also suggests a top-down approach to set boundaries to acceptable behavior within research so that they can really drive funding and protect careers. They may not be thinking about protecting careers explicitly, so it's not a fair thing to point at people and say, this is what you're doing, because a lot of people that would do that wouldn't be aware that that's what they were doing. It's just the normal incentive structure of how things are built that already exists, with the boundaries that they already exist within and relate to. My concern is more so that if the orthodoxy being built by an approach like this precludes finding a solution to a new problem because of the boundaries that are set, it may allow for lots of an explosion of research within the boundaries of the priorities. You'll focus on the explosion of research and ignore the boundaries. If the answer to the new problem is to be found outside those boundaries, you're making it hard. You are excluding that investigation. Investigation of valuable new findings is usually not, maybe not usually, can be made harder by the boundaries of orthodoxy. It is not made impossible, it is made harder by the boundaries of orthodoxy. The novel solutions often look very mundane, or the novel things that end up being important often look very mundane, and it's just because somebody who is outside of the norm is very curious about a very, very narrow thing, and then all of a sudden it explodes and becomes this giant thing. That seems to happen consistently. So while it may be laudable for the normal academic framework to try to build research priorities and build those boundaries to play within, that may be very normal and very laudable and praised at conferences and between countries. The fact that they also note that the geographical variation is there, and they're not acknowledging it in a way that says that those places that are different should also be able to chase down what matters to them, means that like, because they're focusing on the positive outcome. And the positive outcome is that there is these themes that seem to be consistent across geographic variation. That geographic variation may point to something that is more valuable to the people in those geographic regions, such as culture or current boundaries for policy reasons. That should be considered valuable because maybe their approach will solve a problem you can't even see that you have. The variance is important. The variance should not be discouraged, but it should also not be considered as something to import. It should be considered as something to observe and something to import if it proves it is valuable in the other context. So say something happens in location A that location B doesn't value. Location B can observe that it's happening in location A and possibly reflect at some point that maybe it's valuable to import, but they can do it their way, right? So trying to force it on an international or as an international standard means that you are precluding culture, you are precluding variance that could help you, that you have with a problem you don't know you have, right? So variance matters. Maybe they could say that we will focus on the things that seem consistent across geographical variance and allow the other things to or maybe not allow, because allow can suggest a power dynamic, but not interfere or not connect to those other things that are valuable. Maybe as an international approach, what you would do is you'd say, hey, we're going to focus on these things, and we really value that you guys are going to focus on the other things, and we'd love to grab some stuff from that process. So things to consider. Maybe take homes. Be very careful what you do with survey data or how much you value it, because there are normal problems with it that seem consistent regardless of survey, no matter how good you do it. An expert panel can be very dangerous because somebody who either gets nominated as an expert or presents themselves as an expert may also come with the normal personality traits of somebody who thinks they should be able to tell you what to do. It is quite common for experts to present with uncertainty and the awareness that there is variance within a given topic that they are an expert on. If you see somebody who is presenting as an expert or described as an expert that says there's one way, run for the hills. The umbrella review, I need to know more about it. The attempt to generate a standardized process, I think, has problems. It's not that it is valueless. I just think that there are normal problems that would have to be contended with. Whether or not there is a standardized process, well, I happen to be a person who's still going to be me. I'm going to do it my way with respect to understanding what other people are doing and recognizing that there is value in what they do for things that I am interested in a way that I may not be able to tell right now. The variance between people and between investigators is exceptionally important. And be very careful how you try to tamp down on that by telling people that they should think a particular way, that they should behave publicly in one way. Sometimes you want your experts to be weird. You want them to be different. And you want them to be okay being uncertain. Experts who are certain, probably dangerous. Anyways, thank you for listening this far. Hope you've learned something, and we'll talk again soon.